Welcome to the Behaviour Speak podcast. Now, here's your host, Ben Riemann.
Welcome to the first episode of the Behaviour Speak podcast. I'm your host, Ben Riemann. Our initial focus for this podcast will be to highlight some of the great work done in my home province of British Columbia. I'd like to put out a special thank you to CBI Consultants for producing this podcast, and especially our multimedia and creative guru, Carmen Chung, who is doing all of the editing, mixing, logo design, and so much more. We are also an approved continuing education provider with the Behaviour Analyst Certification Board, and will be providing the opportunity for BCBAs and BCABAs to earn continuing education units for listening to our podcast. Today's episode will be worth 1.5 ethics CEUs. Please pay attention and write down the 3 secret words in order to claim your CEUs. My first guest is Danielle Reid, a board-certified behavior analyst from Surrey, British Columbia. Danielle will be sharing her story about what it has been like to be the only Black BCBA in British Columbia, as far as both of us know. If there's more out there, we'd love to hear from you. We have Danielle Reid with us today. So glad you could come.
Yeah, great to be here.
So awesome. So Danielle and I, we met on the Facebook a few months back. You had sort of reached out to me unsolicited and just asked if maybe you could share a story with me. And I listened, and we got to know each other, and a few months later decided, hey, let's share that story again on tape. And so, again, really thankful that you're here. This is my first recording of the podcast, so excited to have you as the first guest. Yeah, so I guess we're gonna get right into it. We're gonna kind of hear your story about what it's like to be a Black BCBA in BC. But before that, we're gonna kind of get into maybe a little bit of kind of your origin story. So. Not only how you got in the field, but maybe, how you ended up in BC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. This is my first podcast as well. And I'm glad it's with Ben because we've had conversations in the past. So I feel a lot more comfortable and I feel safe sharing my story here. So, thanks, everyone, for listening. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Trinidad Tobago, and I moved here about 13 years ago when I was 21, although that ages me, but that's okay. So it's been quite an interesting journey, just readjusting to life here, coming from Trinidad and Tobago. And part of that transition from Trinidad to Canada, BC in particular, has kind of set the premise for how things have unfolded as I move towards, becoming a BCBA. It's been a long journey, but I've learned a lot and I've grown a lot, and I'm happy to be able to share some of what I've been through, and I'm hoping that it serves to educate and inform people, also encourage others who may be trying to get their foot in the field but have had similar struggles. So that's my objective for, my chat today with you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what was that move like? So that was 13 years ago. What was it like when you kind of first came to Canada?
It was at first it didn't feel like a big culture shock. I think as I started to settle into life here, I realized that things were just a lot different. One of the big things that I've had to deal with was just feeling that I stood out. Back then, even in school, I went to SFU. I'd been a class of maybe 300, sometimes 400 other students. They were huge classes. And I would look around and realize I was the only Black person in the class at that time. And it was just this feeling that I just really stood out and I looked different. And that took a lot of getting used to. Even then, because there were so few Black people around and on campus, I could tell that people were uncomfortable or unused to seeing me around. It was the first time, walking through different places and seeing people, kind of flinching or holding their bags. Even when I went to different stores, being followed and all those different things that I just didn't really know what to do with. I couldn't understand it. So it was that experience of, going from just being a person and then here I'm Black. So it's the first time I realized, wait, I'm Black. And that created quite a bit of anxiety for me personally and learning about the stereotypes. I mean, we knew of stereotypes growing up. It was like a TV thing, something you saw on TV, but actually experiencing it and feeling that, people will look at you and make judgments about who you are, that was really, really hard. So I felt like I had to overcompensate to kind of represent for Black people and let them know that we're not all like this or whatever the case was. So put a lot of pressure on myself and a lot of anxiety. And as I go through my journey, you'll see that kind of echoing through things that I would have done to try to make sure that people knew who I was and are able to like value my contribution to different things. And just to give a bit of like a disclaimer, my experiences are mine and they're different, and it's different for each person of color or a Black person. But in my conversations with people, some of the things that sometimes come up would be one, disbelief that there are issues of racism in Canada and in BC. Another issue that comes up a lot is, I guess, just getting that response, well, that wasn't this. This was really this. And I don't think that's what that was. It wasn't race. It was this. Oh, no, that didn't happen. Maybe you just misinterpreted. But it's important for people to understand that for people of color, specifically Blacks, we've had a different learning history. We've had different learning experience, and we've had to learn to make discriminations that others outside of that population wouldn't have to learn to discriminate between. So we're not coming from a place of, oh, because this person was mean to us or kind to us, then it's racist. We actually are really good at knowing the difference between someone who's just having a bad day or someone that's just their personality versus someone who's being a certain way to us and it's being motivated by race. And I feel it's very important for people to understand that and accept that and appreciate the stories that we have to tell. And I would also really challenge the listeners to kind of take note, if you really value like racial equality, take note of your behaviors as you listen. If you find yourself disputing or defending, ask yourself why that might be and why you're struggling to take the story at face value. Because that's often some of the challenges that I have faced in sharing my story and having a lot of issues with just, people accepting my story and my interpretation of my story. So that's the whole backdrop to my journey. And and I hope that listeners out there are able to hear it and accept the experiences that I have to share.
I think that's a fair point. I think, in Canada, especially on the West Coast, I mean, I think things might be a little different in maybe Toronto. I think there's a good, a larger Black community in Toronto, and sort of in kind of Ontario. And I think a lot of that's related to sort of, the states that they border, and sort of the whole, I read, Stamped from the Beginning, by Ibram Kendi, which kind of it's a 400-year kind of history of racism. And I learned so much. I had no idea about most of this stuff. But one thing around sort of where, the Black populations kind of had to migrate in the U.S. Based on sort of, the different laws in the different states. And so, I wonder if sort of that plays into why, Because I was surprised to hear you say, that when you're in SFU. So this was your undergrad, I guess.
Yeah.
That in a class of 300 to 400, you're the only Black person. I would have thought there would have been more, sort of in a big city like that.
Yeah. That was a while ago. That was it's definitely not like that now. But at that time, I would remember huge classes and there might be like one person sitting in the back,
Sure, yeah.
in the class. There were a few times when I was the only one, and I did stand out because I spoke a lot in class. I would put my hand up and ask a lot of questions. Again, not wanting to portray myself as someone who wasn't studious and, but yeah, it was quite interesting. But yeah, quickly I found that more came into SFU, and I eventually was able to connect with others. There was a club, and and even being at that club, it was one of those moments where I can exhale a little bit because I didn't realize how anxious I was feeling just on my regular everyday life. Yeah, so at that time, I found that there were more kind of overt and obvious kind of racism type of acts, being followed, or people, avoiding or flinching, or even some things people would say. But eventually, I noticed that the way that it presents itself was a lot more subtle. And I find because of how subtle some of those things are, it can be really easy to miss. And because it's easy to miss, it's harder to deal with and address and fix, because it looks a lot different in Canada than, say, in the States. But it still has a very significant impact. And I guess you'll see that throughout my story. I found that in general, racism hides in people's body language or certain assumptions that are made. Sometimes you're in a group and, people assume that the person in the group who's probably least able to speak on something, they assume that the person who's least able to speak on something would be me, and you'd see that in people's body language, turning away and asking or directing questions to other people in the group, thinking that, okay, well, if going into a social situation or a conversation, and that, okay, there's a student, there's a supervisor, there's whatever, then whatever that lowest level was, I was always assumed to have been that person. So it was just those subtle things that, having to deal with and feeling I always have to prove myself in various contexts. Yeah. Added to that, other ways that I've seen subtle racism coming up would be just in the nature of how things work here in Canada. It's very motivated by, you have to network, basically. You really have to network to be able to get somewhere. And networking is really hard. You come from another country, you have a different culture. People don't feel like they can relate to you as much. They pay attention to other people who seem to be more similar. And so in situations where you're networking to try to build your career or move forward, I found that I was left out or connections weren't being made. It was very, very difficult to kind of network and build those connections that I needed to further myself and to get the opportunities. So those are some of the areas that I really experienced early on and kind of realized, oh, this is what it's like being here. And that was a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because we had talked about sort of how networking has been difficult for you all through your career, even now. And that's interesting. You didn't mention before the sort of how this kind of all started, sort of from day one, people not even approaching you, not even asking you a question. I mean, right away, you were excluded. Right away, you were kind of told, we're in a group over here, and if you want to be in the group, well, you're going to have to try a whole lot harder than everybody else to get in.
Yeah, that was the stage that was pretty much set. So unless, people had cultural questions, then that was a way in. but it would usually kind of stay there. So I always felt that my perspective or even my intellect or my contribution to things that were more serious and meaningful, it was hard to be taken seriously, even from the get-go. So yeah, so heading into, let's say, my work experience, so it was fairly easy to get into doing BI work. So I worked as a BI for a little bit, and then I joined an agency and I worked as a BI there. And that wasn't too much of a challenge in terms of, finding that job. I really loved the field from the start. I was thinking, oh wow, this is a great field. I can do really well here, and I was all motivated. So I worked hard and I did a lot of work outside of my job to try to build my skills. I really wanted to show that I had the talent for this and the mind for it, and able to understand the ABA world. So I did really well at work, and my my the reason how I can say I did really well was just looking at the data of the kids that I worked with. They were progressing really quickly and they were doing well. Their graphs were nice and steep, for their skills that they were doing. Problem behaviors went down really quickly. And so on that level, I was doing really well. And also, as I stayed within the job, I found that I was being given the more challenging kids, so I was being trusted with, more challenging situations and was able to deal with it and see progress and improvement. And so on that level, I knew that I was doing a good job as a BI, and then other people would come into the workplace and I would be the one who would kind of show them how to do things. So I'd be the one modeling and demonstrating the different procedures and the data collection. And yeah, so from that point of it, it seemed like I was doing a really good job. So I was really, really hopeful at that point that I would be able to, continue and pursue my career in the field of ABA and get somewhere. But it was maybe a few years in working that I realized that, people were coming in and they were able to advance a lot faster than I would, and I'd be kind of in the same position. And, it was confusing, because I have on one end, I am doing a good job. And then on the other end, I'm not able to, progress. That had happened a lot throughout the first few years of working there, and started to become a bit discouraged by that. Still trying, still trying to further my skills and everything, but it was discouraging. So what I did was I tried to be very accountable. So I reached out to management and let them know that okay, this is where I want to go and this is my interest and I'm hoping to do this and to study and whatever. And I was doing that more so than others in the company. There was a lot of turnover, high staff turnover, especially with BIs. I think with BIs, that's how it is. But I kind of wanted to show loyalty and all these things. So yeah, so I stuck around and, I had my meetings and I followed their advice and I checked in and asked what should I be doing. But still those things were happening. People were coming in after me and getting promoted and different things like that. So it became really discouraging. So even at one point I had started looking for work out elsewhere. That was after being a few years in. And once there was a meeting and then all of a sudden there's all these opportunities that I was eligible for. And I was told, oh, somehow you slipped through the cracks, we don't know what happened. And they realized I didn't get a pay raise since, I think I didn't get a pay raise or anything like that in years. And then there were all these promises. So I decided to stay. And then I asked about, oh yeah, what about those positions that I was eligible for? And that went out the window. So it was confusing, and yeah.
So basically you you've come into this company, you show competence really early on, and now but no opportunity for promotion. Then other folks are coming in and quickly moving up the ranks. And then the moment you say, I'm thinking about going somewhere else, it's like all of a sudden, oh, we had opportunities and we just forgot about you. And then and then the moment you say, okay, I'm ready to stay because now all these opportunities are here, they're gone.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
If you're planning to collect continuing education credits for this podcast, the first secret word is racism.
Well, okay, from I have to be honest. So I did get from that. I was finally promoted to like a lead BI at that point. After that, because they realized, oh, I was slipping through the cracks. But even with that, it was different because throughout my years there, when someone got a lead BI position, there's always this kind of, a bit of a fanfare, it was in the staff room, like, oh, this person's now lead BI, blah, blah, blah. And, they had, the person's picture on the entryway, so parents could see, I was just like, oh yeah, you're lead BI and nothing, and it was, honestly, I didn't pick up on it until another person in the company was like, wait, they didn't announce it, or they didn't make like, usually they do this. And I was like, wow, yeah, they usually do.
Wow.
Make a bit of a fuss, so it kind of felt like it was just something that they just did to kind of appease me. So again, I'm not really feeling like my contribution was really being valued at that point. So once I realized that, I was a bit frustrated, but I was like, whatever. So then later on, I decided to do some studies. I wanted to study at Douglas to do, they had that program,
Right.
the DABA program. And I did that so that I can, qualify for the BCABA position and try to move myself up there that way. I had tried previously to get into a master's program, but it wasn't successful. So I figured maybe I would do the BCABA and then work towards a BCBA. So I let the company know and everything. And, I was needing supervision hours and at that time, a lot of others were also going towards a BCBA. I think I was the only BCABA, but others were doing that. And so they put together this whole kind of plan so that everyone can get supervised. So they knowing that I'm doing this and they start this whole program, but somehow, like one of the last to be informed that they were starting this whole cycle of supervision. And so I ended up joining kind of months late into that whole program of being supervised. That was frustrating, it was a huge learning curve though. I got some really good experience. I got to work at different parts of the company and got to do really cool things that I was proud of, but I didn't have enough supervision. And then all of a sudden, the whole supervision program that they were doing, they just stopped it. And I didn't have all my hours, but everybody else got their hours. And I was really confused by that because, as a BCABA, you need the least, right? I didn't need as much as others. So when they had kind of kept that whole system, there wasn't a way for me to continue getting my hours. And I was asking, okay, what can I do? Again, going and talking to other people. I was like, okay, what can I do? What should I do? And so they gave all this advice and whatever. So I followed it. And so I basically traded in steady hours and from like the position that I had to try to work in another capacity within the organization. And still there wasn't sufficient supervision, and I wasn't getting any, and I had almost no work. And so eventually I was just kind of, dismissed from the company altogether because I only had maybe a few clients at that time, and couldn't get anyone to agree to supervise or to arrange things. I mean, they tried here and there, but nothing really stuck and stayed, and I'm feeling like I'm just nagging and bugging everybody, like, oh, my supervision, my supervision. And by that time, I think I had just gotten into a master's program because I was doing the BCABA for so long. I had just said, you know what, forget that. I'll just go straight for the master's and work for the BCBA. And still at that point, wasn't able to get what I needed. So it was really frustrating, and eventually just kind of being phased out of the company altogether.
So you're there continuously, loyal, way longer than it sounds like anybody else, because high turnover rate and those sorts of things. A supervision program comes in. All the BCBA candidates get their 1,500 hours. You only need 1,000 for the BCABA,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't get that. And then they to an area where you have even less contact with supervision, even less contact probably with other people. Really
Mm-hmm.
felt like they just kind of shoved you aside, eh?
Yeah, that's what it felt like. And I know for some people listening, you might be wondering, oh, where's the racism in that? I think if you look at the odds, in my situation, being discriminated against, it just feels like just having really bad luck, but when you stack up the effort that I'm putting out, and I realize that persistency is being punished, because I'm getting discouraged. I'm not trying as hard eventually, after doing so much, reinforcement is just really limited. A lot of my efforts are being put on extinction,
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and it's at an unusual rate when compared with others. And I say that because throughout this process, I'm the kind of person, I'm always trying to figure out, what am I doing wrong? What can I do better? I'm always trying to fix something. And I'm talking to a lot of different people in the field. I'm asking, like, hey, what did you do? And how did you get here? And what have you tried? And even when people are saying, oh yeah, it was so hard, I had to do this. And I'm thinking, well, it's a fraction of what I had to do. And why are the results so different? It's a lot of those little things. I mean, I can even think, I would go to, the conferences and stuff like that. And again, the networking piece. And, I would stay back after presentations that I was interested in. I was always very, very interested in research. So I would, stay back and talk to various people, exchange contacts, follow up, and then nothing, and it's that feeling as if, people aren't really taking my pursuit of this seriously. And, why are they just forgetting to reply, or not even bothering to reply, or even say, oh yeah, sorry, the opportunity was filled, or maybe try this time again, So yeah, those things were discouraging, and to the point where I kind of stopped going to conferences. And, you go there, you mean I'll sit next to people I knew, but you try to participate and you didn't really feel like you were in the group, so it was discouraging on that side of it. Switching gears again, even within my studying, let's say my master's program, which was great. Like, I loved what I learned. It was a really great program. But my one issue that was really suspicious was the fact that I couldn't get into the research program at the school that I was studying in. And I'll explain why that's weird, because again, I'm looking at the data of my performance to know, okay, am I measuring up? Where am I stacking compared with other people? Very early on, after I kind of gotten used to school and doing my master's program and everything, I realized that, I was doing really well. And again, I have something to prove. So I'm working really, really hard. And after maybe the first semester or two, I'm making top marks in everything. So my final grade is near 100% because I'm getting complete marks in my tests and my papers and assignments. And that wasn't easy, of course. It was a lot of hard work. But I wasn't doing it. Well, yeah, I was doing it just, for accomplishment and just, but it was also a point of validation. Like, you know what, I actually can do this. But even with that, you needed a certain grade requirement to enter into like the thesis program, to be able to do research and to get an opportunity to be supervised by this professor who was just great with translational research and all these different things. And it was so exciting. And there were other professors that were super excited to work with me if I got into the program. But the decision was left in the hands of a particular professor who was the guy for the research program. And the other professors are really encouraging me because I had a great relationship with my professors as well. But in spite of feeling that I was the top student, and even other professors telling me that I was the top student,
wow.
I didn't get in to the research program. And the other professors are saying, that's so strange, he's really on top of things. And even when I didn't get in, I'm seeing him sending out emails asking people to apply for the thesis program.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I did apply, and then no response to the email. And it was really strange. And I, after sending a couple of emails and trying to find out, at that point, I was just so discouraged. It's like, you know what, I'm done. I'm just, let's just, call this what it is. Because it was highly unusual. And I have to mention, like, because someone has these biases, it's not necessary that people are ill-meaning. They don't mean to be prejudiced or to bias or to prefer other races above Black people. It's not often, especially in Canada, it's not often coming from that place of, somebody being malicious or just wanting to, it's just really subtle, It's hidden in statements like, oh, well, this person was just a better fit. Or, things like that. Like, oh, well, I think it would suit this better, and those kind of qualitative things, even if on paper, people are equal or even one's better. It's those subtle things that end up being that determining factor. And when there are biases and preferences, those things kind of come to play. So I'll go on a little bit of a tangent, if that's okay. Okay, so this is my analogy, and I got this from when I was studying for the board exam. So this is my way of behaviorally kind of understanding and explaining how racism works. So there was this thing I was studying for the exam, and there was this generalization gradient. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah. So I think it came from like a study with, I think there are different ones. There's rats with different, sound, and there's also pigeons pecking. And so pigeons pecked. They were trained to peck when a certain light came on of a certain frequency, let's say a blue light, and they got reinforced when they pecked in the presence of the blue light. And then they put it on extinction, and then they measured pecks after it was extinguished, and they showed different lights, and then they measured how many pecks in the presence of other lights, other colors and other frequencies of light. And for me, it's kind of like, I think of it as looking at how you were trained. So basic things like, okay, you learn things like kindness and help in the context of your family. And in that context, you're reinforced. And so the generalization gradient, they found that the more dissimilar the stimulus was to the that you were trained at, the less responding happened post that extinction phase. And so it's similar when you think of how you learn different helping behaviors or reaching out or even listening. You learn in the context of your family, people who look like you, and sometimes the more, depending on how how you generalize or how your behavior is discriminated, you might find that your behavior, your helping behavior, your kindness, your reaching out, initiations, and all those types of social behaviors, positive social behaviors, the more dissimilar people are compared to the people you were trained to do those things with, the less you are actually engaging in those behaviors. I feel like that's a good and just a safe example to show how it works. So it's not necessarily well-meaning. It's just that you learned these behaviors in this context, and someone who looks very different because it's a different stimulus. The likelihood of you doing those kind behaviors, reaching out and assisting and all those different things, it could be different, it could be less, and it's just something to kind of keep in mind. And I think it's a good analogy just to think about with how it works and how it's trained. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
So you've kind of learned these skills. I guess maybe we could go back to Trinidad, and you're in kind of that context, and then so because we look at it sort of from the perspective of the biased folk, but we can also look at it from your perspective. And so from your perspective, you're coming from this area where you were trained and you grew up and you were raised, and that's where you kind of formed your values and your interests and all those sorts of things, and your work ethic and everything in between. And then you move into a new context. You still have all those values and all of those opinions and all those perspectives, but now those behaviors aren't being reinforced the way they used to be. And so now what's happened is you've got to kind of increase your response effort. And it sounds like, as you're telling your story, that your response effort just went up and 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 up to the point where, we look at kind of FCT 101. The functional equivalence is not happening anymore, and you're coming pretty close to problem behavior, because your current behaviors just aren't meeting those needs, and because you've got skills and self-regulation and still got all those values, instead of sort of acting out, you just kind of withdraw. And then sort of from the perspective of the biased person, same sort of thing. I know for me, I never thought of myself as, racist, because I never engaged in any kind of overt intentional action. I never used the N-word, or I never threw on a white hood, which is it always seemed to be, if you threw on a white hood, you're racist. If you didn't, you weren't. Those sorts of things. But it wasn't, I've said this a few times to folks now, that I basically had a sort of a sense of kind of willful ignorance, sort of growing up, that I had no idea, but I also didn't put any effort into, getting an idea, about kind of what was going on. And so those biases just kind of formed. Although I didn't really come into contact with too many Black people. And I suppose this is sort of kind of how it translates to your point, is that you're now in a situation where you're engaging with, a lot of folks that aren't Black, that have, developed their own sort of values and perspectives and whatnot. And then now you become this new stimuli in their environment, and they're sort of having kind of the same kind of issue. They're unable to sort of generalize to you, in a sense, and so they're acting in sort of these odd, kind of strange ways. I mean, I'm sure, if I don't know if it would be the same, but I imagine if there were sort of other people of color that they also came into contact, maybe someone who was Asian, that there's a large kind of Asian population in the Lower Mainland, that those folks would probably have experienced something similar, but maybe not as much, because in the Lower Mainland, white folks are exposed to folks from, Asian countries a whole lot more. And so have an opportunity to possibly, practice their skills or refine their behavior somewhat. But then you kind of come into the picture and kind of throw that all off for them. And all those biases just start coming out because you're almost like a storybook character to these folks that they've never sort of
Right.
kind of come into contact. I don't know if that makes sense, but I like that. I like that concept of the generalization gradient. I think that's really interesting. You and I were talking about ethics codes, and kind of how particularly in the context of that agency that you were working for so long, for so long. But it's been the opposite for you. You've put so much effort in, and you've done everything kind of right all the way to the end, and no change. And it really seems like some ethical codes are not being followed here. And we talked about there's the easy ones, right? There's the 1.05s, right? D&E, which, basically, I'll just kind of read them here. 1.5D, in their work-related activities, behavior analysts do not engage in discrimination against individuals or groups based on age, gender, race, culture, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, disability, language, or socioeconomic status in accordance with the law. And then E kind of just builds on that. Behavior analysts do not knowingly engage in behavior that is harassing or demeaning to persons with whom they interact based on those sort of same kind of factors. The next secret word for continuing education credits is diversity.
Yeah. With like the harassment part, not so much, but the demeaning part, it felt like, my efforts weren't valued as much, my pursuit or my inquiries, because, it slipped through the cracks. So being forgotten a lot, others not following through on promises that they would have made, to help or to, give me assistance or, to do certain things, so it felt, that demeaning piece of it felt applicable in my case.
And there's a point where, even though it's not the case, because you have no choice, you have to put up that response effort and really, really, really try to make things happen. You've always had to since you moved here. But from their perspective, they may be looking at you like, oh, there's Danielle again, asking again, pushy Danielle, nagging again, trying to get stuff, doesn't realize we're all really busy. And through all of that, they're discriminating.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've even heard back, someone's like, oh yeah, this is what they said about you. And it was that kind of vibe. It's like, wow, she can't even get someone to supervise her type of deal, And yeah, I mean, people have their personality flaws. I have mine. But and I'm not making an excuse for myself. I mean, everyone's on a growing journey, but, even if there are personality issues that make someone maybe more challenging to deal with, personalities are really a history of, reinforcement and punishment history, and like I said, I did have a lot of anxiety kind of built up, early on. And I wouldn't say that there was anything in my personality that made me, difficult to work with, because I had a great relationship with my coworkers, anything like that. It was more coming from like people who had the power to make decisions, but all the people that I worked with and I helped, and support and trained and showed them different things. Like I had a great interactions. Like I'm still friends with a lot of the people that I've worked with from there. And they're still very supportive of me. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's also important to keep that in mind, when you meet somebody who has a different background and like, oh, why are they like this? Like, why are they so this? Like, why, keep in mind that, they're unusual challenges, and I guess everyone really has a reason for being the way that they are based on, what they have experienced. It's just keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find one thing I've been hearing a lot from a lot of the American podcasts and a lot of the kind of different sort of news outlets that have been kind of coming out is this idea that Black folk not only try harder because they have to, but they actually sort of put on a kind of a different persona than maybe they would normally, maybe that they would with their family or with or though you might have put on sort of in Trinidad. I think they call this, and I'm forgive me if I'm not explaining this correctly, but I think they call this kind of code switching. Have you heard of this? So, and it may be more of an American sort of phenomenon, but it's sort of the idea that if they were to sort of act the way they would normally act, kind of at home and with their families and with their friends that are also Black, if they were to sort of act that way in the workplace that's dominated sort of by the white privilege and whatnot, that those behaviors would be looked at as being negative behaviors, even though they're not, even though they might be looked at as angry people or nasty people or whatever. And so then they sort of do this thing called code switching, where they basically try to act more white, I guess, so that they don't get sort of, so they don't lose opportunities.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that's a real thing. I mean, if I compare myself, like when I'm around other Caribbean friends or African friends, there's a lot more, there's a freer version of me. Mm-hmm. The way I speak will be very different. In some cases, you'll have people like, oh, that's awesome. Can you do that again? Type of response. But in the workplace, it would, I would be seen as very loud
right.
or, unprofessional. Right. That's what I feel, so there's definitely not that persona at all. And I think very early on, when I've learned about the stereotypes that were there for Black people, I've made sure to present myself a lot different. Like right now, the way I'm speaking, it's this weird combination of Canadian accent and some form of my previous accent, a more polished version of that, because it's, on the more positive side, the way people would respond, like, oh, that's so cool, do it again. On the other side, it can come across as, unprofessional. So, I also make sure to show as little emotion when I'm expressing myself or talking with other people, because I feel like the stereotype is, oh, we get angry and we get overly animated. So I make sure to always be very slow, calm, and just kind of stick to the facts. This happened, and then this is what happened. And which I think that's, why the the field of ABA works, just being very objective with the way that I portray information, so that no one can say that I was, putting my own spin on it. So I go very much into this kind of reporting mode. It's okay, this is what happened. These were the sequence of events. And then I did this, and this person said this. And making sure that I don't raise my voice or sound angry. That's a big thing, just not sounding angry. And that's something that I've had to do a lot with even my conversations that it was triggered by all of the events, with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all these things, and the conversations that came, and talking with people and people who are trying to understand. That's usually my approach, just be as factual and as level-headed as, as possible, so that at least what I present has the best chance of being accepted. Yeah.
We also looked at we looked at 4.08 and this is, and when I read this, It got me angry. It got me frustrated with the idea that you're basically, if this is sort of why you pointed this out, but you're basically constantly running into punishment contingencies through your entire sort of career, as long as you've lived here. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So this one, I think I have a specific example for this one. So this one, the behavior analyst modifies the program on the basis of data. So there were instances, two I can remember, where a parent saw me working with their child, and they immediately got upset, and they became loud, and they were like, "Oh, I don't want that woman working with my child." And, he made a bit of a scene. And in one case, the company just kind of complied, and just found another BI for to work with that child. And that was a decision that basically you're modifying the program, because you have to get a new BI who's not familiar with the programs and the child, and you're basically setting the child back. And that was a decision that was not made based on data and what was best for the child and the client, but it was because of this parent who had this unusual response. And so that happened. There was another instance where that happened, and the BCBA, actually, at the time, who's also a really good friend of mine now, she was saying, what, let's take video. Took video of me working with the child, and then sent that to the parent so that the parent could see, like, okay, this is how Danielle works. And and the parent was able to see that the child was making gains, and we got buy-in that way. So at least there was effort to kind of back me up. In the first instance, it was a decision that was not made based on the data or in the best interest of the child. It was based on a parent just having that kind of response, and, people might be thinking, oh, maybe that parent was just, upset that day or whatever. We don't know if it's race. And I have to say that I've had many instances where parents got upset, and there's most of them, I would hands down say, okay, no, that's just this person's personality. But in this case, there were those small cues that it can pick up on, where, I could tell that that had a part to play in that instance. The mass majority of it was not racially motivated. It was just an angry parent, probably had a bad day, or just that's their personality type of thing. But it's important for workplaces to be aware that this could happen. Oftentimes, if a parent got upset with me for seemingly no apparent reason, sometimes I would hear reports from other people like, "Oh, wow, that's really out of character for them. They don't usually do that," And in some of those cases, it's just kind of, it's good to kind of keep track of those types of situations where a parent is acting out of character, more kind of in a more hostile way towards people of color, because of those little biases that can show up every once in a while. It would not necessarily be the majority. It might just be a few. And in those situations, it's important for supervisors or agencies to just give some support, and not just kind of give in, and make decisions, like it says, based on the data.
I mean, I don't have a lot of experience in EIBI and kind of working in clinics with BIs and those sorts of things. And like, is it commonplace for parents in general to sort of, black or white, for parents to sort of say, I don't like this person with my child?
No, that wasn't something, that incident kind of stood out to me because it was a very unusual one. It wasn't something that I've, like, in my whole time there, the only two times that has happened were with me. And it wasn't something that parents did, even if parents were kind of a little uncomfortable, they would usually be like, "Oh, okay, okay," and they'd be fine and comply, Yeah, it wasn't something. And usually they can't really see. It was just really through a little window, so that the parent couldn't really see what I was doing. They just saw interaction kind of blurry, through like a fuzzed out window.
Right. I thought it was also interesting. You had pulled up it pulled up a couple other codes, 6.04, 6.05, and then I went into my handy little crumpled ethics code book and realized everything kind of stopped at 6.02, and I'm like, what is she talking about? And it turns out you had pulled out a couple codes from an older version of the ethics code, and
yeah.
But I want you to read those, and I want to talk about them for a little bit, because those codes would have been in effect, 5, 6 years, 7 years ago,
right,
when you were working for this agency, and they would have applied to those folks,
right,
and they would have seen that in there. So, do you want to just read those?
Sure. There was 6.04, and it says the behavior analyst develops intervention that benefits the employees as well as management. That's 6.04. And 6.05 says the behavior analyst develops intervention that enhance the health and well-being of the employees. Yeah, so I saw those, not realizing, wait, those aren't in effect anymore. But those were two that I felt weren't in place with my experience. Felt like those were kind of ignored, like the well-being of employees, well, namely me, and benefits. I know it talks about interventions, but when it's an organization full of behavior analysts, everything you do, affects everyone.
Well, I mean, like in the context of kind of organizational behavior management, OBM, which is, a legit prong of ABA, managers are doing interventions all the time on their staff. And I think that's what these codes are referring to. They're referring to sort of, you've got to be behavior analytic, not just with the people you serve, but with your staff. And that's how you're going to recruit and retain and keep folks around. And there, and there's some amazing literature out there that, can kind of speak to that. And it sounds like these codes were written, with that sort of OBM kind of lens in mind. And so you'd think they would have some of those pieces in play. Interesting on one hand that, they clearly, weren't following sort of those ones. And I know at the time, I was in a ethics workshop recently. At the time, those were guidelines, right? They've changed from guideline to compliance since they kind of refined it. And so, one could argue, well, those were just guidelines. We didn't really, we could kind of do what we want with them. But it's interesting, sort of on a bigger level, why those aren't there anymore. Why there are no longer compliance codes requiring, folks to treat their employees with, some level of dignity and kind of push things forward.
Yeah, keeping their well-being in mind. Yeah.
The final secret word for continuing education credits is networking.
We also had 9.0. That one is just the behavior analyst promotes the general welfare of society through the application of the principles of behavior. And I think that just kind of overarches a lot of everything, because we spoke about, some of my efforts and different things being kind of put on extinction, some being punished, and and that kind of thing. So the principles of behavior apply to everything, and all parts of, my journey of, trying to become a BCBA. And, it's important to just look at the welfare of everyone. I mean, I know our primary responsibility is to our clients, but we have a responsibility to the community in general, to everyone. And I think there are other codes, points in the code, just talking about just for behavior analysts to be positive contributors to society as a whole, and looking for the welfare and, being an advocate and all those different type of things in general, just being an upstanding citizen. And I feel like for us, once we have understanding of the principles of behavior, it's not something that we can just throw off. It kind of influences everything that we do and how we see the world. We see the world in a completely different lens that we can't really unlearn, And so looking at the principles of behavior and broadening that lens, not just to, yes, primarily our clients, but just to how we treat people on the whole and looking at the welfare of everybody else. And a key part of that is, racial equality and all the different equalities that are in existence right now.
Absolutely. There was one more that I kind of pulled out, was 7.01, which might be the BACB's attempt at combining your other ones together. Behavior analysts promote an ethical culture in their work environments and make others aware of this code. Maybe that sort of, it's a pretty broad sort of kind of statement around work environments, but I think it basically kind of speaks to kind of those pieces. But it sounds like, as far as sort of enforcing the code, did that ever, I mean, I'm asking this as sort of, I guess, from a devil's advocate kind of perspective, because, you're on your own, you're on your own basically through this whole experience, you're not given opportunities, people listen to you, but then they forget about you. You've got coworkers, that, you're still friends with, and I certainly am not looking to sort of damage those relationships that you've created. But was there ever a sort of a thought or an expectation, that maybe some of these folks would kind of come forward and either A, advocate for you, within the agency itself, or B, go to the BACB and say, that something's happening here, or and I guess thirdly, did you ever think of kind of doing that all on your own? Which I know it sounds daunting. I don't think I would.
I don't think, honestly, it didn't really occur to me. I think there's generally this, I mean, when you walk into a place and you're the only Black person there, there's a feeling of isolation that you feel, and you go into the environment with that. So there's some options that just did not occur to me. I didn't really, beyond, like other people in the workplace just saying, yeah, that was really messed up, like that. No, that wasn't right. That was probably as much as I expected from anybody. And, I would get, those comments like, I can't believe this parent did that, or I can't believe that happened. That's so wrong. But I wouldn't have expected, for them to participate and advocate. That's why when the BCBA I told you about, when she kind of said, oh, you know what, this isn't right. Like, he doesn't get to choose BI. You're a great BI. This is nuts. And, and she took the video.
I bet. Yeah.
That meant so much. That was like, wow, like, I can't believe that, she thought of doing this. And she's really proven to be a huge supporter. Like, from since then, she would be the awesome one. She's like, if you ever need a reference, you don't even need to ask, just, so I've always had a reference because of her, and she supported me 100%. So, but that wasn't, that kind of behavior isn't something that I expect.
Right. This was a one-off with an amazing person, who you're grateful for and who's advocated for you, but it's not something you'd think others would do. I wonder, I would hope, that that's changing now, that there's going to be more folks now that are going to step up, and advocate and speak up, just with sort of the conversations we're having today and the conversations kind of other folks are having. I don't know if it's true. I mean, it a lot of it's been, writing statements and sort of doing those things almost for show. But are there actual internal, and this is, sort of a rhetoric question because you're not in these companies, but is there actual change happening internally so, that people of color are now feeling like, I have a few more coworkers that actually got my back. I wonder if that's the case now.
Yeah.
I want to move ahead, if you don't mind, to kind of, because you're obviously not with that agency anymore, or if you are, then good for you for speaking up. Let's see how Monday goes.
Oh, my gosh.
from that, when we met, you weren't working for them, so you kind of moved from there to private practice. What made you make that move, and how'd that go?
In a sense, like I mentioned, like I was kind of phased out involuntarily, you know. I I think at that point it kind of got back to me. I was like, oh no, it's costing them more to have me as an employee because of like, you know, the benefit package and that kind of thing, you know. So I was kind of phased out. So left up to me to still be kind of, you know, trying to like, you know, hold it together. But I eventually I connected with another supervisor who was able to give me supervision, and she's been really great. She's been a very good resource, and yeah, so I was on my own for a bit. Well, with that supervisor, still not a lot of work. It was still it was hard to get work. My supervisor was really busy, wasn't able to take on many clients, and I was struggling to just, you know, get my supervision hours as quickly as I needed. By the time I started getting hours, I think others in my cohort from school had already, you know, completed their hours and was about to write. So I was super behind and super worried and
Right,
wondering,
yeah.
oh my gosh, am I going to get my hours within the 5 year limit? What's going to happen? So yeah, so eventually I found a good supervisor. I learned a lot from her and got my hours slowly but steadily. I was able to write the exam and then wrote the exam, passed the exam, and I was kind of on my own for pretty much a full year. And during that time, I could not get new clients. I had maybe a few left over from, you know, when my supervisor and I kind of parted ways, you know, a couple stayed with me and, you know, I had those and I was trying to get more clients and it just was unsuccessful. So I was just thinking, okay, what are my options? What do I do next? And so I'm thinking, okay, maybe I just need to diversify my experience. So I started applying for all kinds of other types of work. Tried to volunteer. I tried to volunteer at independent schools and just kind of offer my services for free to just build the experience that I valued. Lots of job applications. What would happen would be on over email, things would go great and I'd almost be certain to get the job. And then, you know, it'd be a interview and then everything kind of felt, you know, everything kind of was gone by then. And that was just happening over and over and over. And again, you know, I'll take a break and be like, okay, this is too much. And then try again. So yeah, I was looking to get a teaching position at one point to lecture part-time. And I really wanted to because I thought this might be my way in, you know, to get some research experience. If I have some lecturing experience, maybe I can, because again, that was really valuable for me. But what really stung really hard was that interview that I had where I was wanting to get that part-time lecturing position. And then it was a big presentation and I went above and beyond. They said, oh, you don't need to do a PowerPoint. I did a PowerPoint, you know, wanted to do like my best and did all the preparations. There was a panel. Everyone was laughing, having a good time. The interview seemed to go well. When I thought I wasn't doing a good job, I was getting a lot of reassurances like, oh, you're exactly the type of person we need. And, you know, like all your answers like are so great and all these things. I'm getting reassured in the process of like, okay, maybe. And then the day after I get a call back and it's like, oh, we're not giving you the news that you want to hear.
Wow.
We feel like you just need more teaching experience. And that hurt a lot because I'm coming from I'm giving away my time for free before then, trying to get the experience I need to kind of, you know, grow my skills. And even when I'm doing that, I'm not having any luck at all. And, at this point, it's like, I just need someone to take a chance on me, I kind of understand that maybe skills wise, skills in terms of my skills, I'm probably behind a lot of the people who are applying for jobs, but it's really because opportunities haven't come easy for me. And it's not for a lack of trying, and there comes a point where, everyone takes a chance on someone when you're hiring somebody. There's no guarantees. Oftentimes, like if there are options of who to employ, even if someone looks the same on paper, sometimes, what makes that final decision, and who are the people that are able to make the decisions, who are the people who have that power. And oftentimes it's not people who look like me. And just by that mere fact, already slightly at a disadvantage, which is why, when I apply, I feel like I have to be overly qualified, to kind of offset, that fact, so it felt like, I was a bit stuck. But, eventually some good news. And I was able to get a full-time job. And I started this month. Yeah. So at least there's some positivity at the end of this very long story, a long journey. But yeah, that was my interim experience between finally becoming a board certified behavior analyst and now finding work, full-time work.
And so how long had you been a BCBA before you got this job?
Almost exactly a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's awesome. Congratulations for getting something good. It sounds like it's a place we've talked up before where, I mean, you actually have some colleagues now and you can actually network a bit and connect and hopefully, the next time there's a conference that's live, you'll be able to actually kind of hang out with some people and maybe meet some more people and start building those circles. But and maybe I'm misjudging, but it seems like this is a field, at least certainly in the States, this is the case. This is a field where BCBAs are in huge demand, and there's just not enough of us anywhere. Getting your BCBA should really be almost a guarantee of some sort of employment. Particularly in this province. I don't know about other provinces, and certainly in the U.S. Where it's. I was listening to a podcast the other day where I was interviewing someone who became a behavior analyst in the 90s, and it was more difficult to kind of get into things, but now folks are getting headhunted and people are getting emails like 3 times a day, people looking for BCBAs. And so you're obviously intelligent and well-spoken and a ton about behavior analysis. I mean, no one's ever talked to me about generalization gradients before. That's super cool. And you clearly know your stuff. And so there's got to be bias in place here. There's got to be a reason all these places said no, and it's got to be related. It can't be related to your resume. They called you in for the interview for a reason. You're obviously good at talking and having a conversation and doing an interview, and you smile. You don't sit there and monotone and not tell stories and not elaborate. Right. So it's just mind-blowing. Like, I know where you're working now, and I understand why, how you got that job, because I know folks there that are, that it just seems like a good company from what I know about it. And we'll leave the names out and that sort of thing. But it seems like there's a lot more of those good companies around, and I'm surprised, that none of them even gave you a second look. So that's an interesting message, sort of, I think, to the local community to kind of think about, maybe looking at diversifying your hiring practices. I wonder what, if they have other folks of color working for them at all, and sort of what that looks like. Something else that's kind of come up, and if anyone's listening and certainly wants to come forward or even maybe get a hold of you, I don't know that there is another Black BCBA in BC. This is sort of a conversation you and I mean, you don't know any.
Yeah, I don't know. You haven't met any. Not even. There was one I hired for a family a while back, and I was like, you know what, if this one wants to, I'm gonna mentor. But no, I don't even.
Yeah.
Presently, I haven't met any
You know,
BIs.
and they may be out there. So, and hopefully they're out there, or hopefully there's people out there that are, you know, sort of considering this work. I know I worked before this. I used to work in group homes and kind of in that setting, and there was lots of, you know, community support workers and whatnot. And there was a few black folk that worked as staff, but again, not many. I worked in an agency of 800,
Mhm.
and I'm just, you know, don't want to say their names out loud, but I think I can think of maybe 3 or 4 staff there that were black, and so maybe this is sort of a cross sector sort of issue.
Mhm.
But I wonder if there are folks out there, you know, that are either maybe RBTs
Mhm.
or BIs that are, you know, maybe having the same struggles as you,
Mhm.
or if there is a black BCB out there that
They're out
you
there.
know, that wants to reach out. Like, what messages would you have for you know, either the black RBT or the young black person who's, you know, maybe sees this field as being kind of cool, but also notices that nobody anywhere looks like them.
I would say if you're really serious about the field, I would say firstly, you need to find something that really grounds you and, keeps you in a positive frame of mind, and prepare yourself to be determined. Find some way to reinforce your efforts because you may not have it in the sources that they should come from. So make sure that you have something to kind of ground yourself in and to supplement the reinforcement in your life, enrich your environment however you can. I would say really don't give up because it looks like you would be another front runner in the field in BC, and the field needs you, and also think about the clients that need you. Also think of your potential role within the field for other people of color who we don't always see people who look like us in positions of seniority. And if you are in this field, you're probably motivated by helping and mentoring and guiding. And think of it not just for your clients, but also for others in the field. So yeah, build build persistence, prepare yourself, don't lose sight and don't lose your values. Make sure that the situations that you face don't make you bitter or resentful towards other people. It's yeah, I think we're okay with that, but but still, just be mindful of how your situations impact you, and make sure you enrich your environment as much as possible so that you're not building up habits or behaviors or attitudes that make you less effective or make you, less likely to be able to integrate yourself within the field. So, yeah, I would say that just enrich your life, find something that grounds you, be determined, prepare yourself, stay positive, and you can definitely do this.
That's awesome. Yeah, I agree. Well, I hope there's some folks out there that you know, will be, you know, motivated by this. I hope there's some listeners out there that have maybe gained a bit of a new perspective today that they didn't maybe have before they listened. I know for me, it's opened my eyes because I think a lot of folks didn't believe this was an American problem.
Mhm.
You know, and I think on some levels, you know, it is. I think particularly when it comes to sort of, you know, the
Police
police
reform, yeah.
issue. Has that been an issue for you at all here?
Um, Not really. I can only remember myself ever being pulled over maybe twice ever.
Mm.
And I didn't, well, actually, then it was still early in my transition here. Honestly, now if I were to be pulled over, I feel I would have a sense of anxiety. um, Yeah, and it's also I don't know. I haven't even met another I haven't I don't know what the constitution of police officers are in terms of how varied they are, but
Hmm.
yeah, so if I don't know about that too much, but I haven't had much
Yeah,
interactions with police or law
yeah,
enforcement.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I feel now if I were pulled over, I would probably be a bit more anxious now. But I
Hmm.
haven't had unusually negative experiences,
Hmm.
apart just from being followed in the store by security or
Sure. Yeah.
that type of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, yeah.
And I mean, that might have been different if, your family, if your parent, if you were born here, and and your parents were, and so your parents would have maybe had a history as well,
Mhm.
of sort of discrimination in Canada. I mean, I'm sure they're probably I imagine your family's probably running into some similar experiences to yours, just living here now. But I think these are generations of folks in the States that have been,
Mhm.
kind of dealing with a unique history.
Yeah.
Where I think our history, I think just the simple fact on the West Coast anyway, that there just aren't a lot of Black people in general.
Mhm. Yeah.
You don't see it as much. Where we see it more, I think, with the First Nations,
Right.
kind of
Mhm.
population, and that's where kind of a lot more of those, overt discrimination pieces, particularly around police, are
Mhm.
kind of more prevalent. But then I think if you went to Eastern Canada, the story might be
Yeah.
quite different, and the perspective
Yeah.
might be quite different. And not just in the big city like in Toronto. Like I know in Halifax on the East Coast, there's a lot of racism stuff that's going on a lot there too.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And anything else you want to share with the crew?
Anything else? Nothing I can think of right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, maybe that's it. This might be a good place to wrap it up. I think this is podcast number 1. I think we've been going for a good hour and a half, which I think is good enough for folks to drive to any destination and finish the story.
Right.
They might have to press pause a couple times. So thanks again for being on here. This has been super fantastic. A super honor on my part to have you as my first guest and to kind of share this story. I hope you'll come back and sometime and maybe talk ABA.
Yeah.
We definitely talked a lot of ABA today, as far as kind of how it related, and so I
Mhm.
know you definitely have some good perspectives. But it would be neat to see to hear maybe about some opportunities you've had to maybe get into research. That'd be cool to see. I'd love to hear if those opportunities could kind of come your way. And love to just hear you talk about some other topics. Like, what is your sort of favorite area of ABA right now? What's really kind of you're finding really interesting?
So my new recent thing, and I did connect with a couple of people from like on Facebook, other BCBAs. So I'm really interested in learning about precision teaching right now.
Yeah.
That seems to be, I don't know. I did some CUs on it, and I was like, oh, this is what I've been missing in my life. Because I just love the whole idea of the pinpoint pluses and what that means,
Yeah.
like clarity of objectives and how measurable it is and how easy that is to track. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and then just the standardization of that chart because it's like a way for everybody to communicate across the same platform. So that has been a recent interest of mine. So I, I heard from a couple of people who've given me some resources and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And although I'm not like trained in it yet, but I'm becoming more familiar with it. And I think at minimum, I want to use a lot more pinpoint pluses and just how I'm writing
For
program
sure.
objectives and that kind of thing. And it's great because I think it can apply everywhere academics and life skills and all
Absolutely.
those different things, social
Absolutely.
skills. So yeah, that's my latest interest right now.
Yeah, it always behooves me as to why persistent teaching is sort of a separate area when it just, I may offend some folks here, but why it should just be sort of the standard measurement that we all kind of use.
Yeah.
But I do get that there are different contextual things that kind of relate to that. But I took Rick Cabina's. He has a 20 credit hour course on the Central Reach there, and I did that in March. Well, COVID hit hard, and there was nothing else to do. It was a great course. And I wouldn't have had a clue what you meant by Pinpoint Plus in February. So I'm glad I took that course so I could nod and actually know what you mean. Yeah, like what the heck's a Pinpoint Plus? What? Yeah, no, they're really cool. Yeah, no, that'd be neat to hear more as you get a chance to kind of learn some more about that. Mm-hmm. Okay, well let's leave it at that. Thanks again for being my first podcast guest.
You're very welcome.
And look forward to seeing you maybe at our next conference or our next activity. Hopefully in person, but likely on a screen.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. Good. Okay.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, you bet.